and we are back for another episode of Executive Conversations. In this podcast, I talk to marketing leaders in B2B SaaS about how they get buy-in, how they prove value, how they rally their teams, and basically the whole other part that's not just actually doing the marketing, but what's really important to getting things done. So today I have Silvia Valencia, who is VP of Revenue Marketing at Docebo, calling in from Miami in this early morning. Hi, Silvia. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on today because you have quite an interesting career. As we talked about before, you went from head of marketing to working a few years in Refine Labs, which is a demand gen agency, very well known one in the B2B SaaS space, and then you landed this role as VP of marketing. So
Mhm.
um, can you just walk me through like what was your experience there, especially with the angle of learning to get buy-in, learning to present yourself, because that's obviously a really important skill at an agency.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say even more so than in-house, but it's definitely something that clients demand from you at agency side. So yeah, why don't you walk me through your story there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that being part of Refine Labs was being in a rocket ship of accelerated learning at all times through either clients or my peers. I think that was probably the most awesome feeling was being in a room with people at your same you know, level of marketing in a way and having the same problems and the same conversations. And that, I guess, coming from in house was a massive difference and such a cool experience. On the topic of buy in, you're absolutely right. Being or having a portfolio of clients or companies that you're advising requires you to consistently at all times be building trust. You are ultimately an agency or a contractor, an agent outside of their internal in-house team, and what that means is that you're always being evaluated in a way. So the topic of buy-in, the topic of executive conversations never ever stops when you have clients that you are working with, and especially if you're managing spend, investment, performance of that as well. There is always conversations coming in and out about buy-in, about decisions being made about money, and if it's not one client, it will be the other for sure.
When you moved from head of marketing into this role, did you already bring any of those kind of skills with you, like I have to get buy-in for the client, or was there additional things that you had to learn how to present there?
For sure. I think what I brought in was strong um demand experience, strong experience understanding audiences, what it takes to create pipeline, and most importantly, I think the right mindset around what really matters, right? Like if we are talking about the performance of our demand gen efforts, how would I really pitch this? How would I make sure that there's more investment coming in? I think that was part of my experience before Refine Labs, but at Refine Labs we definitely by the nature of the role, and also by being again surrounded by really really smart people, you learn how do I angle, what's my strategy on angling this investment, what makes the most sense for the client, and most importantly for the audience as well, right? We're not just, what was really interesting is it's not necessarily that you have to spend more at all times. It's sometimes reallocation of budget into certain channels, shuffling numbers around. That was always an interesting part of the conversation too.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but I find that, I mean, now in today's age, and I don't know how it was when you were back then, but like the theme of how marketers feel is there's a bigger fear of messing up than fear fear of messing up than fear of missing out. So when you're on agency side, you are it's really important for you as the account manager to make the client look really good because they're like,
Mhm.
I mean, them in their personal role, because then they're going to be reporting to somebody else.
Mhm.
Whereas as the in-house marketer, I don't know if it's the same. As the in-house marketer, you really, really need to make yourself look good. But then as the account manager, you have to try to make the client look good. Did that change anything about how you were reporting to the client, or how you were reporting on the work and the results that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think being an external agency, I even live it myself today, managing our spend, right? And what we decide to outsource versus do in house. And there's definitely a little bit more compassion, more, you know, we're more attached to our internal resources than we are to our external resources. And I think that was a reality when I was working with clients is, like we are like, there's still a lot of commitment for some companies to spend their money externally, and that is often the accelerator that they need to get to where they need to get. But I think there's a lot more scrutiny, honestly, with external resources that are deployed. And even internally, if you think about it, as heads of marketing, we need to justify, or we need to have a strong strategy around, why are you outsourcing this? Why can't you supply it in house? And why does it make sense to go externally? And how are you measuring the impact of that externally outsourced, function or need that you have? So I think definitely you still have to get buy-in when you're in house, especially in a leadership role. But as an agency, and as a manager of accounts, or as the owner of the relationship, the buy-in, the trust building never works, or sorry, never ends. The conversations around making sure your clients and the companies that you work with understand the logic of things, and that you're building that strategy together, never ends as well. So definitely builds your skills quite a lot to have that every single day.
I bet. So you probably manage, I don't know, a couple dozen clients, or dozen, however much you did at Refine Labs, and then moving on to Docebo, which is now a public company.
Hmm.
How did you find that transition when it comes to everything that we're talking about here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a boomerang of Docebo. I used to work at Docebo about 8 years ago, when the company was a lot smaller, and I got the opportunity to work with a lot of the leadership team that is still there. Didn't work closely with them, but I think, that's why it's also so important that you uh, uh, how you show up in any role, regardless of your title. The connections in tech or SaaS are, it feels like it's a giant world, and it's smaller than you think, and you end up, circling back to your network in many ways. Or life has a funny way of, making sure that you're in the same room with people that you used to know before. So I got the opportunity to work with a few folks back then. And then, yeah, coming back again, I already had maybe a handful of relationships with some people. So there was some trust there already. We know they know who I am. But also, I think you are in a new role, especially in this function, in demand or revenue marketing. You have to prove yourself. The clock, the training of the marathon, in a way, starts now, from day one that you enter a company and you begin building relationships with a CEO, with a CFO, with a finance team, with your own team. Everything, I think, has to begin building up to your future plans the day you start, I would say. So, as marketers, we know there's going to be a time when I need to ask for a little bit more buy in, a little bit more budget, a little bit more investment. How am I preparing for that today? How am I beginning that trust with my client or with, these stakeholders from day one? So I think that element was not, it was absolutely part of the equation coming into this role. And I think, again, especially coming from a role where I was dealing with potential scrutiny here and there, even though the companies that I worked with were very bought into the philosophy of, creating demand. And there was still, again, a lot of buy-in that had to be talked about. So that was really good to have before this opportunity, because it, made me be really aware of, okay, like, what conversations need to happen, where's everyone's mindset at, who is who, right? Where's, how do they think of demand, how do they think of marketing, and how can I begin building that today, not 5 months later when I want to ask for, specific things.
I love that. Did you have some kind of framework for how am I going to establish this trust? Because this is your first VP role as well, or like how did you prepare for that initial start in this role?
Yeah, for sure. My mindset is begin begin your angle with the things that, it's so cheesy and probably very standard, but begin with the low hanging fruit and communicate that. It's different if you begin working on your own thing and you're not communicating with executives or with finance about what to expect, and then it just happens, an improvement in your unit economics, or a better performance in pipeline. If it just happens and you did not communicate it in advance, it feels like, oh, you know okay, that's great. But it's a different angle when you intentionally communicate your plan and intentionally set yourself up to collect the fruits of your labor in a way. And my angle is always begin with, where the ripest fruit is, and communicate that a lot, right? I am reassessing budget allocation across our paid search vendors or across our demand capture channels, and reallocating some of that to our demand creation or social channels. And what I expect to see is that in the first 3 months, we are going to have a dip in lead volume, but that will not affect our pipeline volume. Our conversion is going to go up. And I would say approximately 6 months down the line, we may begin to optimize lead volume and see an increase there over and over and over and over again, so that when it happens, the audiences that see these results are already, expecting that, and that checks off your first box of trust of, you begin working on a certain activity, you communicate the expected results, and the results come through. That is the first step. But it's almost like, in these roles of demand, I say it all the time, you can't just focus on the quarter that you're in now or the next quarter, right? Our roles are picture, or give me a picture of Q4 forecasts and outcomes, but also think about the fact that, we have 4 upcoming quarters. So what's the strategy for those? What are we going to do for those? So it's not about focusing on just the short term, but it's about knowing what bets you're placing on what. And short term usually builds strong trust at first, especially if you're coming into a new role and you have the opportunity to audit things and make a couple changes that you feel really strongly about.
So Docebo, did they already have, when you joined, they already had this kind of demand gen approach to things, or did you have to make a shift in the mindset?
I think the philosophy was there from our CEO. Was it actually actioned on and set up in the best ways. Maybe that's where I was able to put a little bit more of, my approach. But definitely the buy-in was there. I in conversations with leaders, I made sure, which is something that previous people that you've had at this podcast have mentioned, is you got to make sure that the overarching buy-in for marketing investment, for doing things that make sense to today's buyers, not buyers 15 years ago, is there. Is that there? Okay, great, that's like a huge milestone. But you also got to make sure that that is being trickled down into how you are um, activating channels. So I would say the philosophy was there, but the activation of channels according to this philosophy of let's create demand and let's be really, really audience driven was maybe where we had a little bit more gaps.
I know that when a lot of go-to-market leaders want to activate this and say, okay, we're going to start this audience first demand gen motion, like you said, lead volume can go down at first, and that makes
Mhm.
investors and everybody a little bit nervous, right?
Mhm.
When this happens. And I know you mentioned setting the right expectations and repeating the expectations over and over and over again and saying, okay, we're going to see lead volume go down, but don't worry, it's going to get even better on the other side of this. But as you mentioned, there's this quarter to think about. So other than just repeating it over and over, because I guess once the month comes in and you have to give a report, there's still a bit of a dip initially. How do you go about dealing with that? Are people getting nervous, or are they still on track since you set the expectations right earlier?
Yeah, for sure. You're gonna get nervous folks in the room. Even if you set expectations in advance, it's only normal, right? We ultimately have a sales team to nourish or feed, right? Like we need opportunities, we need these conversations to be happening. If we're having less, even though maybe we're not aware that we're having less of the crappy ones, it's still like, it's like, oh my god, so there's absolutely still that moment. My approach to it is at all times be prepared to know what type of volume you're expecting to decrease, right? So you have your lead volume. If we're talking about the basics, just lead volume, what percentage of it is within your ICP and what percentage of it is not within your ICP? Ideally, where you are dropping budget is in non ICP audiences, ideally, right? And what you are going to see is a significant reduction of that audience coming in. So paint the picture. It's these types of leads, it's X percentage of our current lead volume. That is where I will see a dip. That's where we are going to be prepared to, make sure that our conversion rate goes up instead with the other percentage of leads that we are getting. And then the moment you say, if someone comes knocking on your door and they're like, lead volume is 30% down, you say, okay, let's break it down, right? What specific leads are down? From what segment? From what region? From what job title? From what from which channels is probably the least relevant one for external stakeholders. They don't care if it's direct or paid search or whatever else, but they care, is it the right job title that is going down? No, it's not. Oh, okay. Like immediate step back after you take a little bit of a deeper approach. um is that still also, is that it, is that going to make people in the room less nervous? I think that helps. Is it everything? No, because what is everything is your pipeline conversion ultimately, right? You should not see a dip month over month in pipeline, because ideally, again, where you're coming in strong is make improvement, set a strong picture, set yourself up for success. And again, whichever angle you end up taking, my suggestion is take the angle that you feel strong about, the angle that you're confident in. Paint that picture first, gain that buy-in first, and then begin doing more experimental things as you go. But of course, I'm not saying, come in and do a strategy that takes 12 months to prove. Is come in, play a couple things that will have short term results, 3 months or a quarter or whichever. And then in the background, begin forming your thoughts, your longer term plans, your demand creation, investments, and set that kind of like path for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Have things being at a public company, I imagine things probably move a little bit slow. You probably how many layers do you have to get through before being able to actually implement something?
Yeah, for sure. I think you would probably be surprised. There's still quite a lot of freedom and trust that I think we have been able to earn. But the trust is there, again, because we've painted our story with a lot of transparency. I don't want to say it's been covered at all, because it absolutely is not. Is this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it, and this is what we expect in the short term and in the long term. Is that clear to your finance team? Are you taking actually the time, when you have a peer in finance walk you through your pacing, right? Your forecasts of your budget pacing. Are you taking the 2 extra minutes to explain to them, this is why I'm making this shift from this to this, because buyers are doing this? And immediately, like, there's a little, light bulb in their head that, goes on, and they understand the gist of your changes, even at the smallest level. So I think there is a some speed that can be earned with trust again. So speed is earned with trust. I don't think that there is a lot of, I haven't experienced it, at least, that we're slower necessarily, especially when it comes to buy-in. In fact, my experience here has been there's a lot more structure, that's for sure. There is a lot more accountability, that's for sure, because we are talking about preparing for public information that is going to be distributed about your performance. So in a way, it feels a little bit more serious. And yeah, there's a lot more on the line, but I don't think it's slow if you've built these, again, trust paths, especially with the teams that hold, the doors to investment.
When you have to report, so you don't only report to your supervisor, what do you have to do with like shareholders or that kind of public reporting of marketing?
Yeah, that's a good angle. That's usually at the C level. So I report to a CMO, and he takes that on, but there's still a lot of conversations that I have with our CRO, with our other VPs of sales, because it's key that there is alignment in the story that we are discovering, and the strategy that we're painting in our plans. That is probably one of the most important pieces in my role, is to make sure that I am aligned to stakeholders, that I am asking them questions, right? Like, what specifically is what you're observing in, this segment of sales, in this sales development function. What is it that I am observing? What are, the insights that we have? Let's share them. Let's build this together. That is super, super key, and something that I am so glad we have at Docebo. Is we have very strong, alignment with our sales teams. Super strong. Again, like, we have the same story. We go and build plans together, and most importantly, we are accountable for the same number. So that's where it begins to, even, I would say, in the conversation of buy-in. If marketing is being accountable for this chunk of the pie, and then the outbound team or sales development is accountable for this other chunk of the pie, and then you kind of have it split all over, then you're fighting for your little piece, and then someone else is fighting for their little piece. And then if you're a CFO, put yourself in their shoes. They're having all these, people, stakeholders coming at them with their own pitch, with their own story, and then it's so much harder to understand, okay, what's actually going to drive us forward. So absolutely key that you are very ingrained to every other revenue function at least. So that definitely helps a lot.
Love that. All right, Sylvia, this feels like a good place to wrap it up. Unless there was anything that you wanted to add, any final notes about getting buy-in as a SaaS marketer.
Yeah, I honestly think it's a mindset. I don't think it's so much prepare yourself for your CFO. I think the last thing that I would say is that has to be strongly rooted in how you are running demand and how you run teams and how you run your own assessment. Is I see it as like intentionality. I want us to be really intentional about how we are spending budget, how we are planning strategies. And I think I am a little bit annoying about that with, my team. Is you want to run this, and it's not so much about, I let's not experiment. It's about why. Tell me why and how it's relevant to the audience and how it makes sense, and how our story, how it ties up to our bigger story and what we're going to learn from it. Very, very intentional deployment of demand, deployment of budget helps you so much when you have to then get buy-in from C-suite. Paint a story is start from your own team, your day-to-day. If that's ingrained there, if ROI and thinking of, hey, this is my company, right? Let's assume that it's my budget, it's coming from my bank account. How would I spend it? How would I make sure I set myself up for success with leading and lagging indicators for it? um, so yeah, I would say it's a mindset, it's a philosophy that you need to adopt every day, that will set you up for success with buy-in with executive stakeholders.
Thank you so much for that. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope the listeners did as well. I will drop off your LinkedIn profile link in the show notes
Hmm.
for anybody who wants to connect with Sylvia. And thanks again for joining me today.
Awesome. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, and for those listening, please do give this a like, um, give it a share with anybody that you think might find it interesting, and I will see you in the next one.